Composition is very important when it comes to photography, and you'll find just about a million tutorials online or on YouTube about it. Now today I'm going to talk about some of my experiences with composition, not so much the basic rules, but just some of the ways that I like to think about it. Ways of thinking that I like to go back to every time that I'm out shooting on like a daily basis, and hopefully they can help you maybe learn a little bit faster as well. Now, before we go any further and before I talk about that, I am going to talk about the basic rules of composition that are out there, because as I said at the beginning, there's like a million different tutorials about that online already. So I feel like there is no point in me sitting here talking about them even further. Many of those videos online are from photographers that are much better than me and do a much better job at explaining those than I could. What I did find with a lot of these tutorials as I was learning though, is that it's not really as simple as just applying those rules of composition to your photography to get like automatically better photos. Because I would often listen to things like, these are general rules, but you know, rules are meant to be broken. And then I would find myself asking a lot, well, how do you know when to break the rules? It's not really a hard and fast thing, and those rules are not concrete. Like every kind of art form, there's a little bit of vagueness to it, and it's kind of about knowing when to break them and when not to break them. But like I said earlier, at the beginning, that knowing when is quite tricky. But something that I wish maybe somebody told me when I was starting out is that knowing them at the beginning is just enough. Just know the basic rules and don't let them paralyze you. Know how they work and just keep taking photos. That's really it. Just keep shooting more and more. And eventually you'll master them in time. It's really just about repetition. Although throughout my years of repetition, I have found that I go back to thinking about certain specific things that help me quite a lot on a daily basis. Some things that have stuck with me more than others. The first of these is using foreground elements. Now for me, this is one of, if not probably my favorite way to make a photograph a bit more interesting. Basically, it's when I use a specific element in the near foreground to block a certain portion of the frame. This can be things like leaves from a bush or from a tree, the top of a fence or a wall maybe. Basically what I'm trying to do is just block a portion of the composition. It doesn't even have to strictly be the foreground. It can be something like the left side of a frame or the right side of the frame, for example. And with any of these ways, it's a good way to add a little bit of mystery or a little bit of curiosity into your photograph and into your composition. Because what happens is you're blocking half of your frame, so you're naturally asking the viewer to ask a question or to push some curiosity on them, asking them, oh, okay, what could be behind a certain element or what's it hiding? And this blocking the foreground often even goes hand in hand with other techniques such as framing, for example. This is when you frame your subject in between other elements of your environment. Things like doorways or windows or like a gap in a fence, for example. And something I've been doing a lot recently when I want to spice things up even a little bit more is trying to add a little bit of motion into that foreground too. I find it works really well for your composition when you slow your shutter speed down a little bit and add something that's moving across the front of the frame. Again, it just makes things that little bit more interesting. The next thing I think about a lot when I'm out shooting, or I guess do in this case, is to move around. This is maybe not what your traditional photographer might say, and it might even be frowned upon in some circles, but I move around a lot when I'm shooting. Actually, this is why in most cases I don't bring a tripod with me anywhere. I find that it sticks me too much to one place, whereas I like to move around and find different perspectives, different angles, basically to find ways to take lots of different photographs. I always feel like people kind of tell you that you should get it right with every single shot you take. Like you should just magically take brilliant photographs every single time. But to be honest, I'm not that good, and I think most average photographers aren't either. Yeah, sure, it goes against the art of photography a little bit, but I like to take lots of different frames and to see what works. At least this was definitely true when I was starting out at the beginning. Sure, it's not always ideal. Sometimes you don't have a whole lot of time. Like there is certain situations where you need to be a bit quicker and you need to get it right first time. But what I found is that at the beginning, I generally missed more than I hit. And over time, I got better and better. And it was just a great way of training that muscle to learn what worked and what didn't. And now as a slightly more experienced photographer who has years of taking photographs behind me, I tend to find that I get a lot more shots first time these days. I find myself naturally thinking in the right way, and I kind of know in a lot of situations which frame is going to work best and which composition is going to work best. But it wasn't like that at the beginning. It took time to learn, and I just took lots of different shots from lots of different perspectives, moved around, and over time built that up. Number 3 is minimalism. Oftentimes I like to go by the philosophy of less is more when it comes to photography. Now maybe this is a matter of taste, but I love those photos where there's not a whole lot going on and it's all very simple. I love that style, and when I'm out shooting I find myself trying to go back to that. I try to keep my frame as simple as possible, and I find that for me at least, it often leads to better photos. I try to think about all of the different things that I have in my frame. Everything should be there for a reason, or at least as much as possible. It's not always super easy. Like with street photography, for example, things can be a bit hectic. So in that case, at least, it's trying to remove as much as you can. Or maybe even not, just it could be a case of photographing something just because it looks really nice. But in that case, maybe sometimes it's also nice to subtract elements so they don't draw away from that one thing that you're trying to show. And my last tip is to try and think like a designer. Sometimes I've found it helpful to try and take a page from the book of other creative fields. And designers in particular are masters of compositions and layouts. They invest a lot of time into learning about these concepts. And there's a long history in design about the importance of layout and composition. And one thing that they often try to achieve in their compositions is contrast. So learning from this as a photographer, I try to find ways to apply contrast to my photos too. Or to look for, as they say in photography, juxtaposition. I try to achieve this in my compositions, not always successfully, I might add, through things like color, shapes, light, whatever it might be. It's a great way to instantly make your photo and your composition stand out. But at the same time, another thing designers often look for alongside contrast in their compositions is balance. So I want my photograph to have contrast, but another question I ask is my photograph balanced? To do this, I look specifically at things like depth and distance, symmetry and placements of certain objects. Various subjects in your composition can be contrasting, but they can also be symmetrical. Really just asking myself is my photograph balanced, or does it just feel a little bit too out of whack in certain places? And then to bring this video full circle, this is where concepts like the basic rules can come in handy. Concepts and frameworks like the rule of thirds and the golden ratio can help you find that little bit of symmetry and can help you know where to place certain subjects and elements when you are that little bit unsure of yourself and you want to really know how to find that little bit of balance. So yeah, a lot of those things are kind of similar things to the basic rules of composition. I guess they're just my weird little way of talking about it. But back to what I said at the very beginning. Composition is very, very important in photography, and it took me a really long time to realize that too. When I was just getting into photography, I was really interested in the editing side and not so interested in the composition side. And when I was looking at tutorials online, I really only wanted to learn how to edit. But it didn't take me long to figure out that it's very hard to edit a bad photograph, and especially a badly composed photo. As I mentioned, the concepts frustrated me a little bit. Over the years, I found it more and more interesting, and now actually I really enjoy it. And those are the specific things that I learned that made it much more fun to go back to. So hopefully they can help you too. But again, I'm going to say it for good measure. With composition and photography in general, the most important thing is just to take photos. Keep flexing that muscle, doing it over and over again. Repetition is key. Getting a better understanding of the basics every time and doing it over and over again. And to be honest, there is no end point. That's one of the great things about photography. You can never stop learning, and you're going to have to keep doing it forever. Or at least that's the way I like to look at it myself. I hope that you enjoyed this video and you managed to get some value out of it. And if you have some of your own composition tips or different ways of thinking about it, please let me know in the comments as well. It's one of the whole points of me starting this channel is to also learn too. And what I'm finding with every single video I make is that I'm actually thinking more about photography and concepts, and I'm learning more and more all the time too. So that would be really great. And I would really love to get like a community going here as well, and maybe some conversation in the comments. So please do let me know what you think. And if you have any specific ways of thinking about it, that would be amazing. If you're interested in more photography videos, I have lots planned coming up, so please do subscribe. So stay tuned and see you soon.